and determined to realize the constitutional right to health in the shortest time period by delivering a universal health care coverage USA system. This entails promoting access to quality and affordable health care through the Universal Health Care Coverage Program. Towards this end, Mr. Speaker, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 141.2 billion to the health sector to support various programs aimed at supporting universal health care coverage. Mr. Speaker, specific proposed allocation for the various activities and programs include Kenya shillings 18.4 billion for the universal health care coverage, Kenya shillings 3.7 billion for the Kenya COVID-19 emergency response project, Kenya shillings 4.1 billion for free maternity health care, Kenya shillings 5.9 billion for the managed equipment services, as well as managed equipment services, MES, as well as Kenya shillings 1.7 billion to provide medical cover for the elderly and severely disabled persons in our society. Mr. Speaker, to lower cases of HIV/AIDS, malaria and tuberculosis in the economy, Kenya shillings 24.8 billion is proposed at a global fund, and Kenya shillings 4.6 billion to enhance vaccines and immunization program. Mr. Speaker, to promote early diagnosis and management of cancer and reduce the burden of treatment among Kenyans, I propose to the National Assembly to effect a budget allocation of Kenya shillings 1.9 billion for construction of cancer center at Kisii Level 5 Hospital, Kenya shillings 500 for strengthening of cancer center management at Kenyatta National Hospital, and an additional Kenya shillings 155 million is proposed for the establishment of regional cancer centers. Further, to improve the health service delivery, I propose to the National Assembly to effect a budget allocation of 21.6 billion for Kenyatta National Hospital, Kenya shillings 12.8 billion for the Moi Teaching and Referral Hospital, Kenya shillings 8.8 billion for the Kenya Medical Training Colleges, Kenya shillings 3.3 billion for the Kenya Medical Research Institute, Kenya shillings 2.4 billion for the construction of the Kenya National Hospital burns and pediatric centers, Kenya shillings 1.4 billion for the equipping of laboratories and classrooms of KMTC, Kenya shillings 1.1 billion for the renovation of Kenyatta National Hospital, Kenya shillings 1 billion for the procurement of family planning and reproductive health commodities, Kenya shillings 1 billion for the procurement of equipment for the National Blood Transfusion Service, and Kenya shillings 352 million for the digital health platform. Let me turn to digital superhighway and creative economy. Mr. Speaker, the digital superhighway will play a critical role in enabling the government to achieve the objectives of bottom-up economic transformation agenda, as well as in enhancing revenue collection via automation of VAT systems. Digitalization and automation will increase productivity and competitiveness through providing quick access to the market and reducing information asymmetry, as well as improving risk management. Promotion of music, theater, graphic design, digital animation, fashions, and craft, among others, will increase employment for the youth. Mr. Speaker, the implementation of these interventions is expected to stimulate economic recovery while at the same time securing sustainable and inclusive growth amidst emerging challenges. But more importantly, improve the quality of growth from the public sector investment-led growth to a dynamic private sector-led growth. To achieve these aspirations, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 15.1 billion to fund initiatives in the information, communication, and technology sector. Specifically, Mr. Speaker, this proposed allocation includes 600 million for the government shared services to fast-track the development of the Concert Technopolis city, I propose the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 4.8 billion for the horizontal infrastructure phase 1, Kenya shillings 1.2 billion for Konsa data center and smart city facilities, and Kenya shillings 475 million for construction of Konsa complex phase 1B. Mr. Speaker, other proposed allocations include 5.7 billion shillings for the construction of the Kenya Advanced Institute of Science and Technology at Konsa Technopolis, Kenya shillings 1.3 billion for maintenance and rehabilitation of the National Optic Fiber Backbone Phase 2 expansion cable, and Kenya shillings 583 million for the maintenance and rehabilitation of the last mile county connectivity network. Mr. Speaker, having highlighted expenditures under the 5 priority sector areas of the bottom-up economic transformation agenda, I now turn to other proposed areas of expenditure in this budget that will support our path towards sustainable and resilient economic growth trajectory. First, let me turn to investing in critical infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, the government will continue to expand critical infrastructure in roads, railways, sea, and airports to create an enabling environment for economic recovery and employment creation. Towards this end, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 244.9 billion to support construction of roads, bridges, as well as their rehabilitation and maintenance. Mr. Speaker, to expand the railway transport, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 37.4 billion for the second standard gauge railway, for the standard gauge railway. Kenya shillings 579 million for the rehabilitation of the locomotives. Kenya shillings 889 million for the development of Nairobi Railway City to facilitate movement of goods and people. I propose to the National Assembly to allocate Kenya shillings 1.1 billion for the Nairobi Bus Rapid Transport Project and Kenya shillings 300 million for the acquisition of ferries for Lake Victoria. I have proposed to the National Assembly to effect a budget allocation of, I have also proposed to the National Assembly to effect a budget allocation of Kenya shillings 727 million for the construction and expansion of airports and airstrips, Kenya shillings 500 million for the smart driving license, and Kenya shillings 2.6 million for infrastructure development in Dongo Kudu Special Economic Zone. Mr. Speaker, to support the production of reliable and affordable energy, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 62.3 billion. Out of this allocation, Kenya shillings 33.8 billion will cater for the national grid system, 12.1 billion will cater for rural electrification, Kenya shillings 11.4 billion will be for development of geothermal energy, Kenya shillings from 3.2 billion will be for alternative energy technologies. Let me move on to improving education outcomes, Mr. Speaker. The ultimate means of ensuring an equitable society is through investment in education as part of human capital development. For this reason, the government will continue to address inequalities in our education system so as to level the playing field for all children irrespective of their background. Mr. Speaker, to improve the education outcomes in the country, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 628.6 billion to the education sector. Out of the proposed allocation, Kenya shillings 12.5 billion will cater for the free primary education, Kenya shillings 65.4 billion for the free day secondary education, including insurance under NHIF for secondary school students, Kenya shillings 25.5 billion for junior secondary school capitation, Kenya shillings 5 billion to support examinations fee waiver, Kenya shillings 4.8 billion for recruitment of 20,000 intern teachers, Kenya shillings 1 billion for the promotion of teachers, Kenya shillings 4.9 billion for the school feeding program, and Kenya shillings 940 million for the provision of sanitary towels. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 1.3 billion for training of teachers on competency-based curriculum, and Kenya shillings 400 million for the digital literacy program and ICT integration in our secondary schools. To support infrastructure development and ensure safe learning in schools, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocations of Kenya shillings 6 billion for primary school and secondary schools infrastructure, including classrooms for junior secondary schools, and Kenya shillings 1.9 billion for construction and equipment of technical training institutes and vocational training centers. Further, 1.8 billion is proposed to increase access and improve the quality of technical and vocational education training programs under the East Africa Skills Transformation and Regional Integration Project. Mr. Speaker, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocations to the education sector to include 316.7 billion shillings for Teacher Service Commission, Kenya shillings 97.5 billion for the university education, Kenya shillings 30.3 billion for the Higher Education Loans Board, Kenya shillings 2.7 billion for Kenya Secondary Education Quality Improvement Project, and Kenya shillings 5.2 billion capitation for TVET students. Mr. Speaker, Kenya shillings 980 million is proposed for technical vocational education training and entrepreneurship, Kenya shillings 1.5 billion for promotion of youth employment and vocational training, and 749 million for the research, science, and technology and innovation. Let me move now to supporting manufacturing for job creation. Mr. Speaker, in order to improve productivity in the manufacturing sector, as earlier indicated, the government has adopted a value chain approach through bottom-up economic transformation agenda. This will address bottlenecks that impede the growth of the manufacturing sector in order to create jobs and enhance the economy's competitiveness. To further promote local industries, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 26.9 billion under the various implementing ministries, departments, and agencies. Out of this allocation, 4.7 billion will support establishment of county integrated agro-industrial parks, Kenya shillings 3 billion for construction of 6 export processing zones flagship projects, Kenya shillings 3.1 billion for supporting access to finance and enterprise recovery project, Kenya shillings 500 million for the development of special economic zones textile park in Naivasha, and Kenya shillings 1.8 billion for the construction of an effluent treatment plant at Kenaini. In addition, Mr. Speaker, in order to maximize the benefits from our cash crop, the government will make further investment towards the revival of and enhancement of output. In this respect, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation to the revitalization of the cash crops. Kenya shillings 120 million for cotton, Kenya shillings 62 million for coconut, Kenya shillings 35 million for cashew nut, and Kenya shillings 150 million for pyrethrum. Mr. Speaker, I also propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 100 million for the modernization of cooperative cotton ginneries, Kenya shillings 134 million for the National Edible Oils Crop Promotion Project, and Kenya shillings 270 million for sugar reforms support project. Mr. Speaker, to equip the youth with essential internship opportunities, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 1.5 billion for the Kenya Industry Entrepreneurship Project. The Kenya Industry and Entrepreneurship Project, Kenya shillings 300 million for the Kenya Youth Employment and Opportunities Project, Kenya shillings 332 million for the construction of industrial research laboratories, and Kenya shillings 182.9 million for the constituency industrial development centers. In addition, improving security, Mr. Chairman, the security is critical for creating a safe environment for the investment and protection of our citizens and their property. For this reason, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocations for Kenya shillings 338.2 billion to support operations of the Kenya Defence Forces, the National Police Service, the National Intelligence Service, and the prison services. Mr. Speaker, the proposed allocation include 144.9 billion for the Kenya Defence Forces, Kenya shillings 98.6 billion for the National Police Service, Kenya shillings 44.3 billion for the National Intelligence Service, and Kenya shillings 31.3 billion for prison services. I have also proposed Kenya shillings 8.8 billion for the leasing of police motor vehicles. Mr. Speaker, for better equip the National Police Service, I have proposed an initial allocation of Kenya shillings 500 million for the police modernization program. Mr. Speaker, I will later be requesting this august House for enhanced funding approval once the ongoing discussions on a comprehensive police modernization program once it is concluded. In addition, Mr. Speaker, to step up war on crime and enhance support to administration of justice, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 856 million to equip National Forensic Laboratory. Mr. Speaker, the improvement of the welfare of our disciplined forces is at the center of the Kenya Kwanza administration. To improve housing accommodation for our defense forces, we shall fast track the delivery of staff houses through public-private partnership framework. We have already around Kenya Defence Forces to retain Kenya shillings 534 million currently collected from rental income and applied towards repayment for the houses once complete. In addition, Mr. Speaker, as you are aware, His Excellency the President appointed a task force to review the terms and conditions of police, prisons, and national youth service. We shall be presenting a funding proposal to this House once the discussions are concluded and adopted within the government. Mr. Speaker, other proposed allocations include 2.9 billion for group personal insurance for police and prison services, and Kenya shillings 5.8 billion for medical insurance for police and prison services. Mr. Speaker, I move now to protecting the vulnerable groups. Mr. Speaker, at the heart of the government's development agenda is the inclusion in society and employment opportunities for the vulnerable groups, vulnerable members of the society. In this regard, I propose to the National Assembly to effect a budget allocation of Kenya shillings 38.2 billion for the social protection and affirmative actions in this budget. Out of this proposed allocation, Kenya shillings 18 billion will cater for cash transfers to elderly persons, Kenya shillings 7.9 billion for the orphans and vulnerable children, and Kenya shillings 1.2 billion for persons living with severe disabilities. Mr. Speaker, to ensure the elderly and other vulnerable groups under the cash transfer program do not take long waiting for their cash payment and cash transfers cash transfers will be prioritized and paid alongside the monthly government payroll as and when it is due. Mr. Speaker, the proposed allocation for the vulnerable group members of our society also includes 5.6 billion for the Kenya Hunger Safety Net program, Kenya shillings 3.3 billion for Kenya Social and Economic Inclusion Project. In addition, Kenya shillings 900 million will go to Child Welfare Society of Kenya, Kenya shillings 400 million for the Presidential Bursary for the Orphans, and Kenya shillings 459 million for the National Development Fund for persons living with disabilities. These allocations shall remain ring-fenced from any budget rationalization and will be fully funded in order to achieve the desired results. Let me turn to equity, poverty reduction, women and youth empowerment programs. Mr. Speaker, the most pressing challenge in our country at the moment is lack of job opportunities for the youth. This has been exacerbated by the hard economic times following several negative shocks explained earlier in the statement. In order to empower the youth and support businesses owned by youth and women, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 81.9 billion for these initiatives. The proposed allocations include 13.1 billion for the National Youth Service, Kenya shillings 602 million for the Kenya Youth Empowerment and Opportunities Project, Kenya shillings 300 million for the establishment of youth empowerment centers, Kenya shillings 229.7 million to implement the Vijana Vuka na Avya, that is Viva Youth Program. To support the film industry, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocations of 100 million to strengthen the film industry in Kenya, Kenya shillings 49 million for film location mapping, and Kenya shillings 100 million for the Kenya Film School. Mr. Speaker, women participation in the key sectors of our economy is critical for the economy. For this reason, the government will sustain the increased incomes for women through employment creation and supporting women-led enterprises. We will further strengthen women participation in decision-making in our governance and political institutions, as well as reduce sexual and gender-based violence provision of affordable affordable health services. To further empower our women, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 245 million to strengthen prevention and response to gender-based violence in Kenya, Kenya shillings 3 billion for the national government affirmative for the Kenya Government Affirmative Action Fund. Mr. Speaker, to promote global equity, reduce poverty, and embrace social development, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocations of Kenya shillings 53.5 billion for the National Government Constituency Development Fund, as well as 10.9 billion for the Equalization Fund to finance programs in previously marginalized areas. Let me turn to stimulating tourism, growth, sports, culture, and recreation and arts. Mr. Speaker, the government has prioritized expanding the space for creativity, including freedom of expression and protection of intellectual property rights. We will also strengthen mainstreaming of arts and culture infrastructure and support cultural production and creative economy. We are also cognizant of the brand value of Kenyans participating and excelling in international sports arena as of ultimate importance to us. To support tourism to support tourism, sports, culture, and recreation, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 12.5 billion. This includes an allocation of 6.4 billion under the Sports, Arts, Social Development Fund, Kenya shillings 4.1 billion for the Tourism Fund, and Kenya shillings 2 billion for the Tourism Promotion Fund. Let me turn to environmental protection, water, and natural resources. Mr. Speaker, environmental conservation and response to the impacts of climate change are the center of government's socio-economic transformation agenda. To expand access to clean and adequate water for domestic and agricultural use, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 43.3 billion for water sewerage infrastructure development, Kenya shillings 12.4 billion for water resources management, Kenya shillings 1.6 billion for water storage and flood control. In addition, I propose 19.7 billion for irrigation and flood reclamation, and now 1.9 billion for water harvesting and storage for irrigation. Mr. Speaker, in order to support the environment and water conservation and respond to climate change, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 14.4 billion for forests and water towers conservation, Kenya shillings 3.8 billion for environment management and protection, Kenya shillings 3.6 billion for the Kenya financing locally led climate action project, 1.5 billion for meteorological services. In addition, I have proposed an allocation of 1.1 billion for human wildlife conflict compensation, Kenya shillings 800 million for wildlife insurance, Kenya shillings 400 million for maintenance of access road and airstrips in parks, Kenya shillings 319 million for drilling of boreholes in protected areas for provision of water for wildlife, and 226 million for wildlife research facilities. Let me turn to improving governance, sustaining the fight against corruption. Mr. Speaker, the government is committed to scale up the implementation of the provisions of the 2010 Constitution, strengthen the rule of law, increase access to justice, and ensure respect of human rights. Mr. Speaker, to enhance good governance and scale up fight against corruption, I propose to the National Assembly to effect the budget allocation of Kenya shillings 3.9 billion for Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, Kenya shillings 3.6 billion for the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, Kenya shillings 8 billion for the Criminal Investigation Services, and Kenya shillings 8.0 billion for the Office of the Auditor General. In addition, to embrace the oversight and legislative role of Parliament and access to justice, I propose to the National Assembly to effect budget allocation of Kenya shillings 41 billion for the Parliament and Kenya shillings 23.2 billion for the judiciary. Completion of planned projects, Mr. Speaker, in order to ensure the value for money and timely realization of budgets of benefits accruing from budgetary allocation and implementation of planned projects, ministries, departments, and agencies have identified projects for completion in the course of the financial year. The projects will be fast-tracked and protected from any adjustment. The National Assembly is requested to support this endeavor as this is consistent with the resolution of this House. Transfer of national government to county governments, Mr. Speaker. The county governments will receive a proposed allocation of 385.4 billion as equitable share of the financial year 2020 2023-2024. This is 23% of the financial year 2019-2020 shareable revenue, which is the most recent audited and approved revenue by the National Assembly. This is above the minimum threshold required under Article 203, Section 2 of the Constitution. In addition, the county equitable share, the county governments will receive additional conditional and unconditional allocations amounting to 56.7 billion. This brings total allocation to the county governments in the financial year 2023-2024 to Kenya shillings 442.1 billion. Part of this include 425 million for the transfer of library services being a devolved function. Kenya shillings 2.9 billion as outstanding mineral royalties share to 32 county governments as stipulated in the Mining Act 2016, a consolidated grant of 100 million Kenya shillings per county for the aggregated industrial parks program, which is meant to assist the farmers in the value addition and market access for their products. Let me turn to Equalization Fund, Mr. Speaker. In line with the Article 2004, Section 1 of the Constitution of Kenya, Kenya shilling 7.9 billion has been allocated under the Equalization Fund in the financial year 2023-2024. This represents 0.5% of the financial year 2019-2020 revenue, which is the most recent audited and approved revenue by the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, in addition to this, we have allocated 3 billion to cater for part arrears for the previous years, bringing the total allocation under the Equalization Fund to 10.9 billion shillings. Let me turn to transfer of functions between national government and county governments. Mr. Speaker, the National Treasury and Economic Planning, in collaboration with the Council of Governors and other institutions, developed a draft registration to operationalize Article 187 and Article 189 of the Constitution. This is on transfer of functions and cooperation between national and county governments and amongst county governments themselves. The proposed registration has gone through public participation with the county government executives, county assemblies, development partners, among others. Mr. Speaker, I will shortly submit the bill for the Cabinet approval and onward transmission to Parliament. Let me turn to measures to enhance county government's own source revenue. Mr. Speaker, the National Treasury and Economic Planning, State Department of Lands, Council of Governors, and other stakeholders have developed the National Rating Bill 2022, which went through the first reading on 8th March 2023 in the National Assembly, and thereafter was submitted to the National Assembly Committee on Lands. The bill provides, among others, standards in the way rating and evaluation is conducted in the country, how to deal with the properties cross-cutting in more than one county government, procedures for claiming and payment of contribution of real rates, and timely updating of valuation laws by the county governments. More importantly, the bill will repeal the outdated Valuation for Rating Act Cap 266 and Rating Act Cap 267 and align property rating legal regime with the devolved system of governance. Our appeal to the House is to consider and fast-track this bill to unlock revenue potential to the county governments from property taxation as it was envisaged in Article 203, Section 3. Let me turn to sharing of mineral royalties revenue. Mr. Speaker, Mining Act 2016 assigns 70% of the mineral royalties collected from mining companies to the national government 20% to county governments, and 10% to communities. Since 2016, county governments and communities have not received their share of these royalties. To address this matter, I have submitted a framework for sharing 2.9 billion shillings among 32 county governments for mineral royalties outstanding as of 30th June 2022 for consideration and approval by the Parliament. Mr. Speaker, during the Intergovernmental Budget and Economic Council (IBEC) 17th Ordinary Session held on 31st May 2022, IBEC considered and adopted a report and a framework for sharing of funds arising from contravention of county government registration. In the next financial year, the National Treasury has proposed Kenya shillings 108 million to be shared among the beneficiaries of county governments. Mr. Speaker, enhancement of county government has its own challenges. One of such challenges is multiplicity of fees and charges imposed by county governments that increase the cost of doing business and negatively impacts on our competitiveness as a country. Some county governments have imposed charges in a way that prejudices national economic policies, economic activities across county boundaries, or the national mobility of goods, services, capital, and even labor. As a result, the National Treasury and Economic Planning has been receiving a lot of complaints from the ministries, departments, state agencies, and the private sector relating to the uncoordinated manner in which counties are imposing multiple fees and charges. Mr. Speaker, some neighboring countries have also complained that some of the charges imposed by the county governments are against the East African Community Customs Management Act and East African Community Common Markets Protocol, and may result in retaliatory measures and trade disruptions between Kenya and other partner states in the East African community. To address these issues, the National Treasury and Economic Planning has resubmitted the county government's revenue raising process bill of 2023 to Parliament for consideration and enactment. I urge this House to expedite the enactment of this bill in order to promote the competitiveness of our country in doing business and open up counties for, open up the country for investment. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to taxation measures. Mr. Speaker, I will now turn to 2024 budget. I will begin by highlighting the key measures on custom duty as agreed by the ministers responsible for finance and economic affairs in the East African community during the pre-budget consultation meeting that was held in Arusha in May 2023. Mr. Speaker, during the East African Community pre-budget consultations meeting, the ministers noted the significant contribution of manufacturing sector to job creation and economic growth in the region. The ministers therefore agreed on measures to prevent the proliferation of cheap imports into the region so as to protect local manufacturers from unfair competition and enable them to access raw materials and inputs at affordable prices. Mr. Speaker, the agreed custom measures shall become effective from 1st July 2023. Mr. Speaker, one of the success stories of the East African community is the establishment of the East African Customs Union. It's a single customs territory. In order to streamline importation of goods into the customs territory, the East African region completed the comprehensive review of the Common External Tariff, CET, and this has been under implementation from 1st July 2022. The revised tariff has a 4-tariff band structure compared with the earlier 3-tariff band structure. In the new structure, raw materials, that is, as well as inputs and capital goods, are imported duty-free. Intermediate goods are imported at a rate of 10%, while finished goods, which are not available in the region, are imported at a 25% tax. Finally, Mr. Speaker, all finished goods which are available in the region in sufficient quantities attract a common external tariff rate of 35%. The revised tariff bands are meant to cater for goods with long value chains, which require differentiated rates to promote investments. Mr. Speaker, despite rice and wheat being among the staple foods in our countries, Kenya's production of these food items does not meet the domestic demand. In order to meet domestic demand, Kenya will import rice at a rate of 35% instead of 75% under the EAC Common External Tariff. Further, in order to ensure that there is enough wheat to meet local demand, while at the same time protecting wheat farmers from unfair competition, Kenya will import wheat under East African Community Duty Remission Scheme of 10% instead of 35%. The importation of wheat will be undertaken upon recommendation of the Ministry of Agriculture, who will ensure wheat millers, as a priority, purchase local wheat before they are allowed to import. Mr. Speaker, in order to support local automobile industry assembly in the region, the East African Community Partner States agreed to continue with the importation of raw materials for manufacture of parts used in the assembly of motor vehicles, and especially leaf spring, radiators, and wiring harness under the duty remissions. In addition, the region agreed to extend importation of completely knocked down kits for assembly of motorcycles at 10% under the duty remission, as the region awaits the finalization of the East African Community Assembly regulations. Mr. Speaker, Kenya has suffered capacity to manufacture various products in the metal and allied subsector, thus providing employment opportunities to many Kenyans, thus failing to provide employment to so many Kenyans. In order to continue safeguarding this sector, the East African Community Ministers agreed that imported iron and steel products shall continue attracting a duty rate of 35% with the corresponding specific rates for a further 1 year for Kenya. Mr. Speaker, our hard-working farmers are capable of producing enough food to satisfy domestic demand. In particular, local demand for most vegetable products has been adequately served by our farm produce over the years. To protect these farmers from cheap imports, Kenya has been around to extend the import duty rate of 35% in addition to the specific import duty rates on vegetable products for a further 1 year. Mr. Speaker, the high cost of inputs of animal feeds, coupled with other factors like unfavorable weather conditions, make the locally manufactured animal feeds expensive and hence contribute to food inflation. In order to promote the local manufacturing and make animal feeds affordable to farmers, Kenyans will import inputs for manufacture of animal feeds duty-free under East African Community Duty Remission Scheme for 1 year. Mr. Speaker, last year we allowed the manufacturers of baby diapers to access inputs for manufacture of baby diapers duty-free. This was meant to lower the cost of manufacturing these essential products. I'm happy to note that many companies have responded to this incentive by increasing production. In order to continue making these products affordable to our babies, the East African ministers allowed Kenya to extend the duty-free importation of inputs for manufacture of baby diapers for a further 1 year. Moreover, to protect these manufacturers from competition from imported products, the region allowed Kenya to extend charging imported baby diapers at a rate of 35% for a further 1 year. Mr. Speaker, leather industry is one of the priority value chain under the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. In order to support local value addition and protect the industry from unfair competition, the East African Community Partner States agreed to retain the import duty on imported leather and footwear products at a rate of 35%. In addition, Kenya was allowed to extend the duty-free importation of raw materials and inputs for manufacture of footwear products. Mr. Speaker, Kenya has adequate capacity to meet local demand for roofing tiles. In order to facilitate access to Kenyan-made roofing tiles at affordable prices, Kenya was granted extension of a duty-free window for importing inputs for the manufacture of roofing tiles for a further 1 year. Mr. Speaker, in order to protect the Kenyan producers of paper and paper products from the proliferation of cheap imports, Kenya was allowed to import these products at a rate of 35% for the next 1 year. Mr. Speaker, in order to protect local production of safety matches, particle boards, plywoods, among other goods of timber, Kenya was allowed to extend charging of specific rates of import duty in addition to ad valorem duty ranging from $120 per metric ton to $200 per metric ton on these goods. This is also meant to curb the undervaluation of goods and safeguard revenues further. Revenues. Further, Kenya was allowed to charge a rate of 45% on imported furniture in order to protect local manufacturers and producers. Mr. Speaker, Kenya has sufficient capacity to manufacture plastic and rubber products to supply both the domestic and regional markets. In order to protect local manufacturers, Kenya was allowed to impose import duty rate at 35% on these goods for 1 year instead of 25%. Mr. Speaker, in order to protect local assembly of smartphones and other mobile phones, Kenya was allowed to extend the import duty rate of 25% on smartphones and other telephones for cellular networks or other wireless networks for 1 year. Further, Kenya was allowed to extend duty-free importation of
Njia bora ya kutumika kuondoa mapungufu hayo ni kurekebisha viwango hivyo vya ushuru. Utaratibu huu unajumuisha utozaji wa ushuru wa bidhaa kwa kiwango cha 1% ya thamani ya bidhaa. Mheshimiwa Spika, aidha marekebisho haya mara ya mwisho yalifanyika mwaka 2016, bidhaa ambazo zinadhalilishwa ndani ya sheria ya fedha mwaka 2018. Kwa kuzingatia mkakati wa taifa wa kukuza uchumi, viwanda, bidhaa za mvinyo, vinywaji vikali, spirits, bidhaa za sukari zinazozalishwa nchini hazitafanywa marekebisho. Mheshimiwa Spika, napendekeza kusamehe ushuru wa bidhaa unaotozwa kwa mujibu wa uwezo wa injini kwenye magari yanayotumia nishati ya umeme. Napendekeza kusamehe ushuru wa bidhaa unaotozwa kwa mujibu wa uwezo wa injini kwenye magari yanayotumia nishati ya umeme pekee unayotambulika kwa HS code ambazo tumeziorodhesha kwenye jedwali, pamoja na magari yanayotumia nishati ya gesi asilia CNG pekee. Lengo la hatua hii ni kuhamasisha matumizi ya nishati ya umeme na gesi asilia nchini na hivyo kukokotoa matumizi ya fedha za kigeni inayotumika kuangalia nishati na mafuta kutoka nje. Jambo hili linahusisha pia na vifaa kama ambavyo tutafafanua kwenye finance bill. Napendekeza kupunguza ushuru wa bidhaa kutoka shilingi 4386 kwa lita hadi shilingi 2486.45 kwa lita kwenye vinywaji vikali, yani ready to drink, vinavyozalishwa hapa nchini. Vinywaji hivyo vinatambulika kwa HS kodi 2208-6000. Lengo la hatua hii ni kulinda viwanda vya ndani. Kutoza ushuru wa bidhaa kwa kiwango cha shilingi 20 kwa kilo moja ya saruji inayotoka nje ya nchi inayozalishwa ndani ya nchi. Uzalishaji wa sukari unatoa kiasi kikubwa cha hewa ya ukaa inayochafua na kuharibu mazingira. Lengo la hatua hii ni kuongeza mapato ya serikali na kufidia athari hasi zinazotokana na hatua hiyo. Na lengo hili litaongeza mapato ya serikali kwa shilingi bilioni 147,549.60. Kutoza ushuru wa bidhaa kwa kiwango cha 5% kwenye magari yenye uwezo wa injini kati ya cc 1000 na hadi cc 2000 yanayotokana na ukuaji wa teknolojia ili kuianisha magari mengine yenye ukubwa unaofanana na huo. Tumeziorodhesha HS kodi zinazoangukia katika eneo hilo. Kutoza ushuru wa bidhaa kwa kiwango cha 10% kwenye magari yenye uwezo wa injini zaidi ya 2000, zaidi ya cc 2000 yanayotokana na ukuaji wa teknolojia ili kuianisha magari hayo na mengine kama tulivyooanisha katika jedwali hilo HS kodi zake. Kutoza ushuru wa bidhaa kwa kiwango cha 10% kwenye magari ya abiria yanayoingizwa nchini yanayozidi umri wa miaka 5, yani magari chakavu yanayotokana na ukuaji wa teknolojia kama tulivyoainisha katika HS kodi tulizoziweka katika jedwali. Kutoza ushuru wa bidhaa kwa kiwango cha 30% kwenye sigara na bidhaa za aina hiyo zinazotumika mbadala na tumbaku zinazotumika kwa HS kodi 2402-9000, tumbaku inayovutwa kwa kutumia bomba la maji inayotambulika kwa HS kodi 2403-1100, na sigara za kielektroniki na bidhaa za aina hiyo zinazotambulika katika HS kodi hizo tulizoziweka katika jedwali. Kutoza ushuru wa bidhaa kwa kiwango cha 20% kwenye mashine za kamari zinazoingizwa kutoka nje ya nchi na zinazozalishwa nchini. Mashine hizo zinatambulika kwa HS kodi kama tulizoziweka hapo. Hatua hii inatarajia kuongeza mapato ya serikali kwa zaidi ya milioni 1365. Kuongeza ushuru wa bidhaa kutoka 589.05 kwa lita hadi shilingi 600 kwa lita kwenye vinywaji vya kuongeza nguvu energy drink zinazoagizwa kutoka nje ya nchi. Vinywaji hivyo vinatambulika kwa HS kodi ambazo tumezionyesha hapa. Mheshimiwa Spika, hatua nyingine ni kufanya marekebisho ya sheria ya ushuru wa bidhaa sura namba 147 ili kuanisha codes zilizomo kwenye kitabu cha viwango vya pamoja vya ushuru. Hatua hizi za ushuru wa bidhaa kwa ujumla wake zitaongeza mapato ya serikali kwa shilingi milioni 448,989. Mheshimiwa Spika, kwa upande wa sheria ya usimamizi wa kodi sura namba 438, Mheshimiwa Spika, napendekeza kufanya marekebisho yafuatayo. Kurekebisha kifungu cha 35 cha sheria ya usimamizi wa kodi, tafasiri ya neno primary data saver ili lijumuishe seva halisi iliyopo nchini. Kufanya marekebisho kwenye kifungu cha 86 kifungu kidogo cha kwanza cha sheria ya usimamizi wa kodi ili kushusha kiwango cha sasa cha adhabu inayotozwa kwa makosa ya kutokutoa risiti, kutokutumia mashine za kielektroniki, kinachoanzisha currency point 300 sawa na shilingi milioni 4,500 hadi currency point 200 sawa na shilingi milioni 3, ili kuweka asilimia ya thamani ya kodi ambayo ni asilimia 20 ya thamani ya kodi iliyokwepwa au shilingi 1030 kutegemea na kiwango kilichotakiwa kulipwa. Vile vile napendekeza kushusha kiwango cha adhabu kinachotozwa kwa makosa ya kutokudai risiti au kutoa taarifa ya makosa ya kutokudai risiti kwa asilimia 20 ya thamani ya kodi iliyokwepwa au shilingi 1030. Lengo la hatua hii ni kuwawezesha wale wenye mitaji midogo kuweza kustahimili kulipa bila kufunga biashara zao, na lengo lingine ni kuwezesha kuondoa majadiliano ya faini hizo ambayo mengine yanavunja sheria. Mheshimiwa Spika, kwa upande napendekeza kufanya marekebisho ya jedwali la viwango vya tozo chini ya kanuni ya ada ya mabango na matangazo kama ambavyo tumeonesha katika jedwali hilo. Napendekeza kufanya maboresho ya sheria ya fedha ya serikali za mitaa sura namba 290 ili jukumu la kukusanya ushuru wa mabango lihame kutoka Mamlaka ya Mapato Tanzania kwenda Ofisi ya Rais TAMISEMI. Lengo la hatua hii ni kuongeza ufanisi. Napendekeza kufanya marekebisho sheria ya fedha za serikali za mitaa sura namba 290 kwa kuunganisha ukusanyaji wa kodi ya majengo na tozo ya ardhi ili ziweze kulipwa kupitia namba ya malipo, yani control number, moja kwa moja. Mapato haya yataingizwa mfuko mkuu wa serikali kwa kubainisha kiasi cha fedha kinachokusanywa kutoka kwenye kila chanzo. Aidha, sheria ibainishe kuwa 20% ya mapato hayo yatarejeshwa halmashauri ili kuwezesha ufuatiliaji na ukusanyaji. Wizara ya Ardhi pamoja na Ofisi ya Rais TAMISEMI watasainiana mkataba wa makubaliano, yani MOU, wa usimamizi wa ukusanyaji wa kodi ya mapato ya ardhi. Lengo la hatua hii ni kuondoa kero kwa walipa kodi na kuongeza tija katika ukusanyaji wa kodi hizo. Mheshimiwa Spika, napendekeza marekebisho ya kifungu cha 9A cha sheria ya fedha za serikali za mitaa sura namba 290 ili kuipa Ofisi ya Rais TAMISEMI jukumu la kukusanya ushuru wa huduma, yani 0.3% ya mauzo ghafi kwenye leseni za huduma za fedha za mitandaoni, electronic money issuance license. Mheshimiwa Spika, kwa upande wa serikali za mitaa napendekeza kufanya marekebisho ya sheria ya serikali za mitaa ya utozaji wa kodi ya majengo sura namba 289 kama ifuatavyo: kurekebisha kifungu cha 6 kipengele kidogo cha kwanza cha sheria ya serikali za mitaa na utozaji wa kodi ya majengo sura namba 289 kwa kuongeza maneno yote ya wilaya isipokuwa majengo yaliyosamehewa kupitia kifungu cha 7 cha sheria hii. Lengo la hatua hii ni kuleta usawa katika kulipa kodi. Kuainisha zoezi la uthaminishaji wa majengo. Mheshimiwa Spika, kwenye hili kuainisha manake tunatoa taarifa kwamba zoezi la uthaminishaji wa majengo lianze kwa mwaka wa fedha 2023/2024 ili kodi itozwe kwa kuzingatia thamani halisi ya jengo ifikapo mwaka 2026. Zoezi hili la majengo litasimamiwa na Ofisi ya Rais.
Exemption to locally purchased machinery to further boost access to healthcare services. In this regard, I propose to the National Assembly to amend the VAT Act to extend the exemption to machinery and equipment purchased locally for use in the manufacture of pharmaceuticals. Mr. Speaker, in order to address the escalation of tax expenditures and foster prudent utilization of fiscal resources, I propose to the National Assembly to remove VAT exemptions in respect of taxable services supplied for construction of specialized hospitals, goods and services for the construction of tourism facilities, goods worth more than 2 billion purchased by manufacturers, as well as plant, machinery and equipment used in the construction of plastic recycling plants. Mr. Speaker, currently transfer of business as a going concern is subject to VAT at a standard rate. Taxpayers have raised concern that this discourages business reorganization and sale of businesses. In this regard, I propose to the National Assembly to amend the VAT Act to exempt transfer of business as a going concern. This is expected to encourage mergers and acquisition, hence boost growth of businesses as well as their efficiency. I now turn to the amendments to the Excise Duty Act 2015. Mr. Speaker, I will now highlight tax measures proposed under the Excise Duty Act. The Excise Duty Act provides for remittance of excise duty to the Kenya Revenue Authority, KRA, by the 20th day of the following month. In this era of technology, there's no justifiable reason for waiting for 20 days to report transactions to the KRA. In order to cure the delay, I propose to the National Assembly to amend the Act to provide for a maintenance of the excise duty on betting and gaming activities within 24 hours after closure of transactions by the betting and gaming companies. Mr. Speaker, betting and gaming prize competition and even lotteries are addictive in nature and have negative socio-economic consequences to the society. To discourage participation in these activities by Kenyans, and especially school-going children, I propose to the National Assembly to increase the rate of excise duty on betting, gaming, prize competition, and lotteries from the current 7.5% to 12.5%. Mr. Speaker, there has been an increase in the importation of fish into the country, which has negatively affected the local fish industry. To promote and protect local fish industry, which provides livelihood to many Kenyans, I propose to the National Assembly to introduce an excise duty on imported fish at Kenya shillings 100,000 per metric ton, or 10% of the excisable value, whichever is higher. Mr. Speaker, the government charges specific excise duty on juices per liter. However, there has been an increase in supply of juices in powder form, and based on the current tax regime on juices, the powdered juice is not subject to excise duty. And this creates an unfairness in taxation of juices. In order to cure this problem and to create a level playing field, I propose to the National Assembly to introduce excise duty on powdered juice at a rate of 25 shillings per kilogram. Mr. Speaker, currently, specific rates of excise duty are subject to annual adjustment for inflation. However, taxpayers are concerned with the frequent changes in specific rates of excise duty through annual adjustment, creating uncertainty in prices and distorting the markets. Therefore, in order to create certainty in excise duty tax regime, I propose to the National Assembly to repeal the provision for annual adjustment for inflation. Mr. Speaker, consumption of sugar has been associated with various ailments such as diabetes, which has become common in many families. To discourage consumption of sugar, I propose to the National Assembly to introduce excise duty on imported sugar at a rate of 5 shillings per kilogram, including sugar. But this excludes the sugar imported or purchased locally by registered pharmaceutical manufacturers for use in the manufacture of pharmaceutical products. Mr. Speaker, consumption of alcohol, betting, gaming, and lottery and prize competition are
shilingi $500,000 na ada ya leseni kuu dola za Kimarekani 10,000 kwa mwaka kwenye mashine za slot katika maeneo ya baa. Mheshimiwa Spika, napendekeza kupunguza kiwango cha kodi kutoka 25% hadi 18% kwenye mapato ghafi ya michezo ya kubahatisha kwenye maeneo ya uendeshaji wa mashine 40 za slot. Lengo la hatua hii ni kuweka usawa katika utozaji wa kodi katika michezo ya kubahatisha. Mheshimiwa Spika, napendekeza kufanya marekebisho sheria ya usafirishaji bidhaa nje ya nchi kwa kusamehe tozo ya 80% kwenye ngozi ghafi zinazosafirishwa na mwekezaji waliopo kwenye mamlaka ya ukanda maalum wa uwekezaji EPZ. Mheshimiwa Spika, napendekeza kufahamisha kwamba kikao cha mawaziri wa fedha Jumuiya ya Afrika Mashariki kilichokaa kwenye pre-budget meeting kilichofanyika tarehe 12 Mei jijini Arusha kilipendekeza kufanya marekebisho kwenye sheria ya usimamizi wa forodha ya Jumuiya ya Afrika Mashariki pamoja na viwango vyake vya forodha pamoja na ushuru wa forodha wa Jumuiya ya Afrika Mashariki kwa mwaka wa fedha 2023-2024. Mapendekezo hayo yamelenga kuongeza kasi ya kufufua uchumi, kuhimili na kukabili athari za mabadiliko ya tabia nchi. Mheshimiwa Spika, mapendekezo ya mawaziri wa fedha wa Afrika Mashariki ni kama ambavyo tumeonesha kwenye HS kodi ambazo tumezibainisha kuanzia ukurasa wa 126 hadi ukurasa wa 135. Mheshimiwa Spika, kwa upande wa ushuru wa forodha kwa viwango vya 25% badala ya 10% kwa mwaka mmoja kwenye nyuzi za pamba, yani cotton yarns, zinazotambulika kwa HS kodi ambazo tumezibainisha katika jedwali linaloonekana katika ukurasa wa 157. Maboresho ya ada tozo mbalimbali za taasisi pamoja na taasisi za serikali. Napendekeza kufanya marekebisho ya kurekebisha, kuanzisha, kufuta na kupunguza ada na tozo mbalimbali zinazosimamiwa na wizara, idara pamoja na taasisi za serikali kama ifuatavyo. Kwa upande wa Wizara ya Uwekezaji, Biashara, Viwanda na Biashara, kufuta adhabu ya 15% ya thamani ya bidhaa inayotozwa na Shirika la Viwango vya Tanzania kwa bidhaa zinazoingia nchini bila ya kuwa na cheti cha uthibitisho. Kwa upande wa Wizara ya Uchukuzi, kufanya marekebisho kwenye tozo za uwekaji wa miundombinu kwenye hifadhi za barabara, right of way, kwa kupunguza ada ya awali, yani initial fee, za usimikaji wa nyaya za mawasiliano kutoka dola za Marekani 1000 kwa kilomita hadi dola za Kimarekani 200 kwa kilomita, na ada ya mwaka, yani annual fee, kutoka dola za Marekani 1000 kwa kilomita hadi dola za Marekani 100. Lengo la hatua hii ni kufanikisha malengo ya kusambaza miundombinu ya mawasiliano kutoka mikoani kwenda wilayani na kutoka wilayani kwenda kwa wateja vijijini. Kwa upande wa Wizara ya Mambo ya Ndani, Mheshimiwa Spika, napendekeza kufanya maboresho ya ada na tozo mbalimbali ikiwemo kuongeza tozo ya hati ya tabia njema kwa wageni kutoka dola ya Kimarekani 25 hadi dola 50. Kuongeza tozo ya hati ya tabia njema kwa wakazi kutoka 2000 hadi 10,000 za Tanzania. Kuongeza tozo ya gharama ya uchunguzi wa hati zinazobishaniwa kutoka 50,000 hadi 75,000. Kuongeza tozo ya ada upotevu wa mali kutoka shilingi 500 hadi 1,000. Kutoza ada ya shilingi 10,000 za Kitanzania kwa uchunguzi wa leseni. Kuongeza ada ya kibali cha kuhifadhi silaha katika maghala binafsi kutoka shilingi milioni moja hadi milioni 1.5 million. Kuongeza ada ya kuhuisha umiliki wa silaha za moto za kiraia kama bastola kutoka 70,000 hadi 100,000, shotgun kutoka 35,000 hadi 50,000, gobole kutoka shilingi 35,000 hadi 50,000, bunduki rifle kutoka shilingi 35,000 hadi shilingi 50,000. Mheshimiwa Spika, napata shida kutaja majina haya ya bunduki kwa sababu Watanzania hatujazoea mambo ya bunduki kwa ajili ya mali. Mheshimiwa Spika, kwa upande wa Wizara ya Maliasili na Utalii, napendekeza kufanya marekebisho ya ada na tozo mbalimbali kwenye sekta ya utalii kama ifuatavyo: kufuta ada ya kupanga na kurudia kupanga, grading and regrading ya huduma za malazi zilizoko nje na ndani ya maeneo ya hifadhi. Kupunguza viwango vya ada na leseni za biashara kwenye utalii katika huduma za malazi zinazomilikiwa na Watanzania. Kupunguza ada ya leseni ya utalii kwa huduma za malazi ambazo hazijakaguliwa. Hatua hii pamoja inalenga kupunguza gharama za uendeshaji na kuvutia uwekezaji zaidi katika sekta ya utalii. Kwa upande wa Wizara ya Uvuvi, napendekeza kufanya marekebisho mbalimbali kwenye sekta ya mifugo kama ilivyobainishwa katika kiambatanisho namba 10. Sekta ya mifugo imepata nafuu nyingi kama ambavyo tumeendelea kutoa katika sekta za uzalishaji. Kwa upande wa sekta ya uvuvi, kufanya marekebisho ya tozo mbalimbali kwenye sekta ya uvuvi kama ambavyo tumeweka kwenye jedwali namba 2. Sekta ya uvuvi kama ilivyo kwa sekta ya mifugo, na yenyewe ni sekta ya uzalishaji ambazo tunaziangalia katika umakini wa kukuza sekta za uzalishaji. Na sekta ya kilimo tunatarajia kufanya marekebisho ya ada ya kufanya utafiti za kilimo kama tulivyoainisha katika jedwali. Sekta ya kilimo na yenyewe ni sekta ya uzalishaji, ni sekta ambazo tunazipa kipaumbele. Kwa upande wa utamaduni, sanaa na michezo, napendekeza kufanya maboresho, kutoa tozo ya 1.5% kwenye vinyl, min disc, compact disc, DVD na SD memory. Hivi ni moja ya vifaa vinavyotumika kuzalisha na kusambaza na kudurufu na kutunza kazi za sanaa. Kwa upande wa wakala wa usajili wa udhamini RITA, kufanya marekebisho ya tozo mbalimbali kwenye sekta ya usajili, ufilisi na udhamini kama ambavyo tumeweka kwenye jedwali. Kwa upande wa wakala wa mbolea kama tulivyoweka kwenye jedwali 12. Kwa upande wa OSHA, kufuta ada ya ukaguzi ya shilingi 200,000 kwa ufungaji gesi kwa kila kituo. Lengo la hatua hii ni kuchochea mazingira ya wezeshi ya biashara nchini, hususan katika maeneo ya vituo vya gesi. Mheshimiwa Spika, pamoja na maboresho ya sheria mbalimbali yaliyofanywa na serikali ili kuboresha mazingira ya uwekezaji na kupunguza mwingiliano wa majukumu baina ya taasisi mbalimbali za udhibiti nchini na kufuta ama kupunguza ada za tozo za kero, bado kumekuwa na changamoto za taasisi nyingi za udhibiti zinazosimamia sekta mbalimbali na kuongeza kero ya ufanyaji biashara. Serikali inakusudia kuanzisha mfumo wa pamoja wa ukusanyaji wa ada, tozo na adhabu za taasisi zinazodhibiti, yani single window payment system, na kuweka utaratibu ambao utazifanya taasisi hizo kufanya kaguzi kwa namna ambayo haileti usumbufu kama nilivyosema hapo awali. Napendekeza kufanya marekebisho madogo mengine yasiyo ya kisera katika sheria mbalimbali za kodi pamoja na maeneo mengine. Maeneo hayo ni pamoja na hatua za kikodi ambazo zimependekezwa katika jedwali ambalo tumelionyesha. Mheshimiwa Spika, sura ya bajeti ya mwaka 2023. Mheshimiwa Spika, bajeti ya mwaka 2023 inaonyesha kuwa jumla ya shilingi trilioni 44.39 zinatarajiwa kukusanywa na kutumika. Jumla ya mapato ya ndani yanatarajiwa kuwa shilingi trilioni 31.38, sawa na 70.7% ya bajeti yote. Kati ya mapato hayo, mapato yanayokusanywa na Mamlaka ya Mapato Tanzania yanakadiriwa kuwa shilingi trilioni 26.73 na mapato ya idara pamoja na taasisi zingine yanatarajiwa kuwa trilioni 4.66. Mheshimiwa Spika, kwa upande wa misaada, mikopo nafuu kwa washirika wa maendeleo inatarajiwa kwa shilingi trilioni 5.47. Aidha, serikali inatarajia kukopa shilingi trilioni 5.44 kutoka soko la ndani, ambapo shilingi trilioni 3.54 ni kwa ajili ya kulipa hati fungani na dhamana za serikali zilizoiva, na kiasi shilingi trilioni 1.90 ni kwa ajili ya kugharamia miradi ya maendeleo. Vile vile serikali inatarajia kukopa shilingi trilioni 2.10 kutoka soko la nje kwa masharti ya kibiashara kwa lengo la kuongeza kasi ya utekelezaji wa miradi ya maendeleo. Jedwali linaloonyesha sura ya bajeti liko ukurasa wa 172 na ule wa 173. Mheshimiwa Spika, kwa ukurasa wa 174 tumeelezea kwa kifupi baadhi ya vihatarishi. Katika kuhitimisha, Mheshimiwa Spika, serikali ya awamu ya 6 inayoongozwa na Mheshimiwa Dr. Samia Suluhu Hassan, Rais wa Jamhuri ya Muungano wa Tanzania, ambaye pia ndio mwenyekiti wa CCM, itaendelea kutekeleza ilani ya uchaguzi ya CCM ya mwaka 2020 kama inavyosisitiza. Tutafanya mapinduzi ya kiuchumi kwa maendeleo ya watu.
In the production process over a period of 3 years. In determination of the taxable profit. But in order to increase working capital for the businesses, I propose to the National Assembly to amend the Income Tax Act to provide 100% investment deduction of the value of these items in the first year of use. Mr. Speaker, in 2020, the government implemented various measures to cushion businesses from adverse effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. This included providing tax incentives during the period. With easing of the COVID-19 pandemic and recovery of businesses, I propose to the National Assembly to lower the upper thresholds for turnover tax from 50 million to to 25 million and retain the lower threshold of Kenya shillings 1 million. In addition, I propose to the National Assembly that the turnover tax rate for this sector to be at 3%. Mr. Speaker, last year, the government provided various tax incentives to promote local manufacturing of human vaccines. That was applied in order to further support these manufacturers. So in order to continue supporting these manufacturers, I propose to the National Assembly to exempt the manufacturers in this sector from withholding tax on interest and royalties paid to non-residents. Mr. Speaker, the current payee tax structure has 3 rates and bands applicable to 3.3 million employees. The bands are as follows. 10% is applied to income tax, to income up to 24,000 per month. 25% is applied to the next 8,333 per month, and while 30% is applied to incomes above 32,333 per month. Mr. Speaker, employees who fall under the first category, who constitute about 42.5% of the total employed workforce and who earn a maximum of 24,000 per month, don't pay any tax to government, as the tax computed from this income is equal to the relief of 2,400 per month under the Act. The second category of employees, who constitute about 37.2% of the total working population and earn incomes between 24,000 per month to 32,333 per month, pay a tax rate of 25%. The third category of employees, that form 20.4% of the total employees, earn incomes above 32,333 per month and pay a tax at the highest rate of 30%. The tax structure for the payee, Mr. Speaker, means that the tax burden falls on 57% of the total employed workforce. The tax structure is therefore regressive, and as an individual employee earning income above 32,333 per month falls within the upper band at the rate of 30%, leaving no significant gap between employees who do not pay tax as a result of tax relief and those earning higher incomes. In this respect, we have to embark on the review of this taxation structure to make the tax bands more progressive, sharing the tax burden more uniformly across income groups. Mr. Speaker, at the start of this journey, I propose to the National Assembly to introduce 2 additional tax bands. A 4th band will be applicable to employees earning incomes between 500,000 per month to Kenya shillings 800,000 per month at the rate of 32.5%. And a 5th band that will be applicable to employees earning incomes above 800,000 per month at the rate of 35%. As a result of this change, the employees who will pay tax at 30% will be 19.5%, while those 2 new tax bands will affect 26.67% of employees. And the last band will constitute, let me repeat that. As a result of this change, the employees who will pay 30% tax will be 19% of the total while the two tax bands will affect 26,676 employees who constitute about 0.8% of total employed workers in the country. Mr. Speaker, we shall continue to review the pay structure to make it as progressive as possible and redistribute the burden of tax incidents. Measures to enhance tax administration. Amendments to the Tax Procedure Act 2015. Mr. Speaker, currently, Kenya Revenue Authority has no visibility on the transactions of trusts, largely due to lack of requirement to report to KRA by trustees. This makes it difficult to ascertain the tax payable on the incomes paid to the beneficiaries of trusts. In this regard, I propose to the National Assembly to amend the Tax Procedures Act to require all trustees administering trusts in Kenya to maintain and avail records required by the Kenya Revenue Authority. Mr. Speaker, in order to enhance the tax compliance by use of technology, I propose to the National Assembly to amend the Tax Procedures Act to require taxpayers to issue electronically generated tax invoices which can be tracked and traced through an electronic tax invoice management system, the e-TIMS. Mr. Speaker, in order to streamline the tax administration and remove pressure to abandon taxes and grant waivers of tax, I propose to the National Assembly to amend Tax Procedures Act to remove powers to abandon tax, as well as waivers on penalties and interest that currently exist in the Act. Mr. Speaker, to encourage taxpayers to pay outstanding tax debt, I propose to the National Assembly to introduce a one-year tax amnesty on penalties and interest on the accrued tax debts up to 31st December 2022. In order to benefit from this amnesty, taxpayers will be expected to clear principal taxes between 1st September 2023 to 30th June 2024. And now I take this opportunity to urge all taxpayers to take advantage of the one-year amnesty to clean their tax ledgers by paying all tax arrears. Mr. Speaker, in order to enhance the power of the Commissioner General to correct taxes from non-compliant taxpayers using agency notices, I propose to the National Assembly to amend Tax Procedures Act to expand the scope of agency notices to cover default in payment of installment taxes, installment taxes, and in situations where taxpayers has made self-assessment and submitted tax returns but has failed to pay the taxes on due date. Mr. Speaker, submission of manual tax information to the Commissioner General poses administrative challenges and delays the decision making. I therefore propose to the National Assembly to amend the Tax Procedures Act to require the Commissioner General to provide a data management and reporting system that will allow taxpayers to electronically submit standardized transactional data on real-time basis. Mr. Speaker, impersonation of the Kenya Revenue Authority officers is an offense under the Penal Code and poses revenue risks. We have witnessed increased cases of impersonation of Kenya Revenue Authority officers. In order to curb this vice, I propose to the National Assembly to amend the Tax Procedures Act to provide for offenses and sanctions relating to impersonation of Kenya Revenue Authority officers. Mr. Speaker, in order to enhance the efficiency in administration of tax refunds and boost cash flow of businesses, I propose to the National Assembly to amend the Tax Procedures Act to allow taxpayers who overpay taxes to utilize overpaid tax to offset both outstanding tax debt and future tax liabilities. In addition, I propose to the National Assembly to amend the Tax Procedures Act to provide an additional 30 days for the determination of complex tax cases. This will provide more time for the Commissioner General to complete audit and investigate processes for complex tax refunds cases. Further, Mr. Speaker, I propose to the National Assembly to amend Tax Procedures Act to require Kenya Revenue Authority to pay approved refunds within 6 months. In instances where approved refunds are not paid within this period, I propose to the National Assembly to further amend the Tax Procedures Act to provide for automatic offset of the approved refunds against outstanding tax liabilities in other tax heads or even future tax liabilities. Let me turn to amendments to the Miscellaneous Fees and Levies 2016. Mr. Speaker, let me turn to the proposed amendments to miscellaneous fees and levies. I had earlier stated that the government is committed to lower cost of liquefied petroleum gas, LPG. In addition to removal of VAT on LPG, I propose to the National Assembly to remove import declaration fees, IDF, and railway development levy on LPG. Mr. Speaker, the Kenya Defence Forces and the National Police Service are exempted from import declaration fees and railway development levy in respect to equipment, machinery, motor vehicles for their official use. However, this does not extend to other goods for official use, such as material supplies. In this regard, I propose to the National Assembly to extend the exemption to all goods purchased or imported for official use by the Kenya Defence Forces and the National Police Service. Mr. Speaker, the aviation sector is critical in supporting tourism and transportation of passengers and cargo. Currently, some aircrafts and parts of the aircraft are exempt from import declaration fees, IDF, and railway development levy, RDL. To further support this industry, I propose to the National Assembly to extend the exemption to cover all aircraft, helicopters, aircraft engines, and aircraft spare parts. Mr. Speaker, currently the imported goods are subject to import declaration fee at the rate of 3.5% and railway development levy at the rate of 2%. On the other hand, raw materials and inputs imported by registered manufacturers are subject to a lower rate of 1.5% for both import declaration fee and railway development levy. These differentiated rates pose administrative challenges and are avenues for revenue loss. In order to address these challenges, I propose to the National Assembly to harmonize these rates at 2.5% for import declaration fee and 1.5% for railway development levy applicable to all goods imported into the country. I now turn to amendments on Betting, Gaming and Lotteries Act Cap 131. Mr. Speaker, currently the Kenya Revenue Authority has not been able to enforce tax collection from betting, gaming, prize competition and lotteries activities due to lack of an enforcement provision in the Betting, Gaming and Lotteries Act. In this regard, I propose to the National Assembly to amend this act to allow KRA to apply the provisions of Tax Procedures Act in enforcing tax correction. Let me now turn to amendments to the Employment Act. Mr. Speaker, in order to provide funds for the development of affordable housing and associated social and physical infrastructure, as well as the provision of affordable home financing strategy, I propose to the National Assembly to introduce an affordable housing levy through an amendment of the Employment Act 2007 to provide a monthly levy payable by the employer and the employee at 1.5% per month for an employee's gross monthly salary. Mr. Speaker, given that the construction industry is labor intensive, we expect every housing unit constructed will create new jobs, both direct and indirect, among the professionals, youth, MSMEs in general, along the production value chain of affordable housing. In order to support enterprises and businesses operating in the special economic zone, Mr. Speaker, through government support, the special economic zone and export processing zone continue to position our manufacturing sector at a pace as pace setters in the region through exports and manufactured goods. Presently, Mr. Speaker, the goods sold from these zones to the domestic market are subjected to import duty and other applicable taxes similar to goods imported from outside the East African Community region. This taxation does not differentiate whether the inputs or raw materials used to produce such goods originate from the customs territory or from outside the customs territory. In order to enhance the market access, I propose to the National Assembly to amend the Export Processing Zone Act and the Special Economic Zone Act to exempt from import duty goods produced from the Special Economic Zone and Export Processing Zone that use inputs or raw materials originating from the customs territory when sold into the domestic market. This will encourage enterprises operating in the zones to purchase raw materials or even inputs from the domestic market. Mr. Chairman, in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, it is clear that Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, it is clear that we face many socio-economic challenges. The global economy may take a long time before output gap is closed, and the cost of living may take a long time to be felt. To address these challenges, the government has initiated policy, legal, and institutional reforms to address these issues. His Excellency the President has already led the way. Under his leadership, we have already laid a firm foundation for the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. The policies spelled out in this budget builds on a momentum for the envisaged transformation that will lead to improved livelihoods for all Kenyans. I therefore urge Kenyans to join hands in making this transformation journey a reality. Thankfully, our country is endowed with the necessary resources and human capital to confront the contemporary economic and social challenges and create a momentum for not only a higher and sustainable but also inclusive growth trajectory, but also create decent jobs, reduce poverty significantly. Mr. Speaker, this budget underpins the country's resolve and commitment to fulfill its social contract to Kenyans by progressively improving their welfare. At this point, Mr. Speaker, allow me to express my sincere gratitude to His Excellency the President, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, the President of the Republic of Kenya, and the Commander-in-Chief of Defense Forces, and His Excellency the Deputy President, His Honorable Mr. Rigathi Gachagua, for their counsel, guidance, and support during the entire process of laying foundation for the bottom-up economic transformation agenda and finalizing this budget. I also want to thank Her Excellency Madam Rachel Ruto, the First Lady of the Republic of Kenya, and Her Excellency Pastor Dorcas Gachagua, the Second Lady of the Republic of Kenya, for their support and contribution to the implementation of government initiatives, especially on the environment and climate change action, financial inclusion, and women empowerment. My special appreciation goes to the Prime Cabinet Secretary, the Attorney General, and my fellow Cabinet Secretaries in their respective Principal Secretaries and accounting officers and staff in the government, ministries, departments, and agencies for their support and contribution in making contributions to this budget. I also extend my gratitude to the Chairman of the Presidential Council of Economic Advisors, Dr. David Day, and all economic advisors at the Council for their critical inputs and guidance in supporting the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. This is one team that used their diverse frontier knowledge and worked closely in developing the Kenya Kwanza Administrative Manifesto, the PRAN, in the run-up to the 2022 general election. We have produced and pulled most of the materials for this policy outturn from the PRAN. And that guidance has been very, very critical. And so, more specifically, I gained a lot of support from my colleague and friend, Dr. Kamau Dhuge, Senior Advisor and Head of Fiscal Affairs and Budget Policy at the Executive Office of the President, and currently he's the Governor Designate for the Central Bank of Kenya, and wish him and pass his congratulations. My sincere appreciations first to the Honorable Speaker of the National Assembly and your counterpart in Senate, the majority and minority leaders, and the entire House leadership, including the respective class for the National Assembly, for the approval process and the budget estimates for the financial year 2023 and related documents. Second, to honorable chairs and members of both the Budget and Appropriation Committee, Finance and National Planning Committee, and all departmental committees in this House that help me in terms of, and help us and my team to finalize the budget propositions. Third, I recognize and appreciate the management and staff of the National Treasury and Economic Planning who have worked tirelessly for long hours, including weekends, to ensure that this budget and supporting documents meet the legal guideline. Fourth, the Kenya Revenue Authority, Central Bank of Kenya, the Attorney General's Office, Commissioner of Revenue Allocations, Financial Sector Regulations, and various agencies under the National Treasury and Economic Planning. They have made contributions, and we appreciate their contribution. Fifth, my gratitude goes to the multilateral and bilateral development partners for their continued technical and financial support. Further, I thank the private sector for the sustained